You ever notice how the smallest envelope in your mailbox can cause the biggest storm in your life? That's what happened to me one sticky July morning in 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic when the world already felt like it was hanging by a thread. I was standing at the curb of my little Texas suburb, wearing my faded navy ball cap, sifting through bills, coupons, and junk, when I saw an official-looking white envelope with the bold black stamp, Maple Creek Homeowners Association. Now, let me back up a bit. My name's Frank. I'm a retired veteran, 65, and I've lived in Maple Creek for over 20 years. My late wife and I raised our kids here. I fought overseas for my country, came back with a bum knee and some scars you can't see, and decided I wanted a quiet life. Gardening, fishing, spoiling the grandkids when they came by, that's what I wanted. That's what I thought I'd bought into when I signed those HOA papers 2 decades ago. But if you've ever dealt with an HOA, you know peace is a luxury they don't always allow. I tore the envelope open right there by the curb, and that's when my stomach dropped. In big bold letters it said, "Notice of HOA fee adjustment. Effective immediately. Monthly assessments will increase by 100%. I read it 3 times. Sure, I'd misread. My monthly fee, already $250, was now going to be $500. And the kicker? No explanation. Just a cold line at the bottom. Failure to comply may result in lien placement or foreclosure action. I swear my hands shook. During a pandemic when people were losing jobs, when neighbors were choosing between groceries and medicine, these folks thought doubling our fees was acceptable? My pension barely stretched as it was. Pause if you're raging. I can almost hear you saying, because I know I wasn't the only one whose blood boiled that day. I hobbled back up my driveway muttering, "You've got to be kidding me." My neighbor, Jim, a retired postal worker, was watering his lawn. He saw the paper in my hand. "They got you too?" he called. I held the notice up like evidence in a courtroom. "You mean they doubled yours?" He nodded grimly. "Every house on this street. Karen's idea, of course." Now, let me introduce you to Karen. And yes, that's her actual name, which feels like the universe has a sense of humor. She was the self-appointed queen of Maple Creek HOA mid-50s. Bleach blonde hair, permanent scowl. She ran the board like a little dictatorship, sending out fines for grass being half an inch too tall, for having the wrong shade of beige on your shutters, even for leaving your trash cans out an hour late. But this was a whole new level of audacity. I remember sitting at my kitchen table with that letter, hearing the hum of my old refrigerator, feeling the weight of what they'd just dropped on us. Inside, something old and stubborn lit up the same feeling I'd had in boot camp when a drill sergeant tried to break me down. You don't push me like that, not without a fight. The next day, the board held a virtual meeting. I logged in, along with about 30 other residents. Karen popped up on the screen, framed by bookshelves that were more for show than reading. She put on her fakest smile. "Good evening, Maple Creek family," she cooed. "As you all know, due to unforeseen expenses during the pandemic, your fees will be adjusted to better support our community's needs." I unmuted. "Adjusted? You mean doubled? During a time when half of us are struggling?" Her smile tightened. "Frank, thank you for your service, but this isn't up for debate." The board voted unanimously. That was lie number 1. I knew for a fact one of the board members, Susan, had resigned a month earlier after clashing with Karen, which meant the board was basically Karen and 2 of her lapdogs. Another neighbor, Marcy, jumped in. "Where's the breakdown of these expenses? We deserve to know what we're paying for." Karen waved a manicured hand. "The details aren't relevant at this time. What matters is keeping Maple Creek beautiful." That's when it hit me. They weren't just squeezing us, they were hiding something. And if there's one thing I learned in the service, it's that when someone tells you to stop asking questions, that's when you start digging. After the meeting, I called Jim. "Something's rotten here," I told him, "and I'm going to find out what." "Careful," he said. "You know they'll come after you if you poke too hard." I laughed bitterly. "Jim, I've faced worse enemies than Karen in my life. I'm not scared of a suburban queen bee. But I'll admit, When the first fine showed up in my mailbox a week later, 50 for unauthorized lawn ornamentation because of the American flag I'd planted in my yard, I felt the first sting of her retaliation. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above me. My mind kept circling back to one question. What are they hiding? The first twist came sooner than I expected. A few days later, Susan, the board member who'd resigned, called me out of the blue. Her voice was low, nervous. "Frank, I heard you spoke up at the meeting. Be careful. Karen doesn't like being challenged." "I'm already on her radar," I admitted. "What's really going on?" There was a pause, then a whisper. "The books don't add up. That's why I left. There's money missing, but she refused to order an audit. If you want to nail her, that's where to start." My heart thudded. Missing money. Suddenly, everything clicked: the secrecy, the doubling of fees, the threats. They were trying to cover a hole, and they thought no one would question it. I thanked her, hung up, and sat there staring at my old filing cabinet in the corner of the room. That's when the idea formed. If they wouldn't hand over the books willingly, I'd find another way. And I wasn't going to do it alone. The next morning, I started knocking on doors, mask on, 6 feet apart, pandemic style. Jim was first, then Marcy, then old Mrs. Henderson down the block. At each stop, I told them the same thing. Something's wrong with our HOA. They doubled fees without proof. We need an independent audit. Some were scared, worried about retaliation. Others were angry and ready to fight. Slowly, I saw sparks of the old neighborhood spirit flicker to life. By sunset, we had a small coalition. Ordinary folks, retirees, teachers, young parents, sick of being pushed around. For the first time in months, I felt hope. Still, I knew this was just the beginning. Karen wouldn't go down without swinging. And something told me the skeletons in Maple Creek's closet were bigger than anyone imagined. As I locked my front door that night, the cicadas buzzing outside, I whispered to myself, "All right, Karen, you wanted a war? You just picked the wrong veteran." And that, my friends, was the day this retired old man decided to take on the HOA and expose a scandal that would shake Maple Creek to its foundations. But here's the thing. What I uncovered next wasn't just about money. It was about power, corruption, and the moment when an entire neighborhood finally said, "Enough." You ever notice how silence in a neighborhood is louder when everyone's angry? The week after we formed our little coalition, Maple Creek felt different. Lawns were still clipped neat, flags still waved, kids still rode bikes, but underneath, there was a current, a hum, like the whole place was waiting for something to snap. For me, it started with stacks of papers. I pulled out my old Navy discipline, sat at my kitchen table with coffee and a yellow legal pad, and began charting out everything I knew: fee history from past years, letters from the board, conversations with neighbors, even photos of the so-called repairs they claimed justified higher fees. And then, I hit my first wall: access. HOA financials aren't something they just hand out, especially not under Karen's iron fist. But I remembered Susan's words. The books don't add up. If she'd seen something, there had to be a crack I could widen. So I called her. "Susan, it's Frank. I need your help. Whatever you saw, can you show me?" Her hesitation was thick over the phone. "Frank, I left because I didn't want to get dragged into this. Karen, she's vindictive. You don't know the lengths she'll go." "I've faced worse," I said. And it wasn't bravado. I had. But this was my home, my neighbors. I wasn't going to back down. Finally, she sighed. "All right, meet me tonight, behind the clubhouse. No one will be there." Tense music cue in your head, right? Because I felt like I was in some low-budget spy movie, creeping through shadows in a suburb instead of jungles overseas. We met under the dim light of a broken lamppost. Susan wore a baseball cap pulled low, like she was hiding from her own conscience. From her tote bag, she pulled a manila folder and handed it to me like it was classified intel. "I made copies before I left," she whispered. "Don't tell anyone where you got these." Inside were partial budgets from the last 2 years. At first glance, they looked routine landscaping, pool maintenance, clubhouse repairs. But then I noticed the line items: payments to consultants, invoices for community enhancement projects that no one in Maple Creek had ever seen, tens of thousands of dollars, unaccounted for. I looked up at Susan. "This is fraud." Her eyes darted nervously. I didn't say that, I just couldn't be part of it. Then she hurried off, leaving me alone under the buzzing lamp. I walked home, with that folder clutched like gold. Inside, something old and fierce stirred. This wasn't just about doubled fees. It was about theft, stealing from retirees on fixed incomes, from single parents, from families just trying to get by. The next morning, I invited Jim and Marcy over. We spread the papers across my dining table, the sunlight slanting through the blinds like interrogation spotlights. Marcy jabbed at one line. "Consulting fee, 15-0. Who the heck was consulted? About what? We've still got potholes on Maple Street." Jim shook his head. "This isn't sloppy accounting. This is deliberate." We sat there in silence for a moment, the weight of it heavy. Then I said, "We need proof, real proof, something we can take beyond this table." "Like an audit," Marcy said softly. "Exactly. Now, here's the thing most folks don't know. Residents actually have rights. State laws often require HOAs to provide financial records upon request. But Karen was banking on intimidation, on people not knowing the rules. She hadn't counted on me being the stubborn old mule I am. So, I drafted a formal letter citing Texas Property Code, demanding access to all financial records. I sent it certified mail, return receipt requested, legal and airtight. That was twist number one, because the next day, Karen showed up at my doorstep. She didn't bother with niceties, just stood there in her designer sunglasses, lips pursed like she'd sucked on a lemon. "Frank," she said, her tone sugar-coated venom, "I received your letter." "Good," I said, leaning on my cane. "Then you know, I expect those records within 10 days, as required by law." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You're wasting your time and making yourself a target. Retired or not, do you really want this fight?" I held her gaze. "Karen, I've fought tougher battles than this, and I'm still standing. Now either comply with the law or I'll escalate." Her nostrils flared. Without another word, she turned on her heel and marched back to her shiny SUV. But the message was clear. She wasn't used to being challenged. That night, I found my mailbox hanging open, my flag snapped off its pole. Petty intimidation. But instead of fear, it fueled me. If Karen wanted a war, she was about to get one. Meanwhile, whispers spread through the neighborhood. People I barely knew stopped me on walks. "Is it true, Frank? You're going after the HOA?" Some cheered me on. Others warned me to back down. But one thing was certain: eyes were opening. And then came twist number 2. 3 days after my letter, I got an anonymous email from a burner account. It contained scanned receipts, thousands of dollars charged to the HOA account for things like spa visits, catered dinners, and even a wellness retreat in Scottsdale. All under Karen's signature. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding. This wasn't negligence. It was embezzlement. Bold, shameless, and right under our noses. I gathered the coalition in my garage that night. The smell of motor oil mixing with righteous anger. We passed the papers around like contraband. "This is it," Jim said, slapping the receipts down. "This is how we bring her down." "But carefully," I cautioned. "We don't leak this yet. Not until we have the full picture. We need an official audit to nail it shut." Still, the fire was lit. Neighbors who'd been silent were now texting me daily, offering to help. Mrs. Henderson, 90 years old, knitted us face masks with Audit Now stitched across them. That's when I realized this wasn't just my fight anymore. It was Maple Creek's. Of course, Karen wasn't sitting idle. The fines started piling up. $75 for a non-regulation bird feeder, $100 for weed encroachment, even though my lawn was cleaner than a golf course. Petty harassment meant to bleed me dry. But each find became fuel. I photographed, documented, saved every scrap, evidence for the arsenal. One evening, as I sat filing away yet another bogus notice, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Drop the audit, or you'll regret it. I chuckled bitterly. They didn't know me very well. Threats don't scare a man who stared down real danger. Still, it proved one thing: Karen was desperate. And desperation leads to mistakes. By the end of that month, our coalition had grown to nearly 40 households. We held socially distanced meetings in driveways, on Zoom calls, even while walking dogs. And the rallying cry was always the same. Audit now. Neighbors shared stories. A single mom fined for having a pink bicycle on her porch. A veteran threatened with foreclosure over a service dog. Seniors harassed for planting tomatoes. The anger wasn't just about money anymore, it was about dignity. And here's where the underdog moment came. For the first time, people who'd never spoken out, shy folks, elderly widows, even the new young family on Maple Drive were standing shoulder to shoulder saying enough is enough. It was bigger than Karen now. It was about community empowerment. The final push of Chapter 2 came when I mailed a second certified letter not to Karen, but to the County Auditor's Office and the State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. Along with it, I included copies of every suspicious receipt and a petition signed by over half the neighborhood. As I dropped that thick envelope into the mailbox, I felt a rush of triumph. Karen had her threats. We had the law. And I had no idea yet just how deep this rabbit hole went. Because in the weeks to come, the audit we demanded wouldn't just expose Karen's greed, it would unravel the entire board, revealing secrets so damning they'd bankrupt themselves trying to hide them. But I'll save that for Chapter 3. For now, all I can say is this. In the battle of HOA, tyranny versus community justice, the first shots had been fired, and Maple Creek was ready for war. You ever feel the air get heavy before a thunderstorm, like the whole sky's holding its breath? That's how Maple Creek felt the week after I mailed that thick packet to the county auditor and attorney general. The neighborhood looked the same: kids chalking the sidewalks, sprinklers ticking back and forth, barbecue smoke curling from patios, but underneath it all, there was a tension, like everyone knew something big was coming. And Karen knew it too. It started small, with those fines. Another notice in my mailbox, 125 for improper shrub height. I laughed out loud when I read it. My hedges were trimmed so square you could balance a ruler on them. But then Marcy called. They hit me too, Frank. $200 for unauthorized decorations. It's just my Halloween pumpkins. And Jim got one next. Apparently my mailbox paint is faded. I repainted it last year. We compared notes, and it was clear. Karen was targeting the coalition. Anyone who signed the petition was suddenly in violation of some nonsense rule. It was petty, transparent retaliation. But here's the thing. Every bogus fine she sent us only made our case stronger. Still, the pressure was real. Some neighbors wavered, scared of liens or foreclosures. One older couple even called me in tears, asking if they should withdraw their names from the petition. Don't back down, I told them, my voice firm. That's exactly what she wants. She's bluffing. We've got the law on our side. But even I started feeling the squeeze. The stress crawled into my nights, keeping me awake. My phone buzzed with anonymous texts. Drop it, Frank. Last warning. One morning I found tire tracks across my front lawn, deep and deliberate. Another day, someone left a dead potted plant on my porch with a note. Is your yard next? Pause if you're raging. I'd tell anyone listening, because I know a lot of you have been there harassed, intimidated, bullied by someone who thinks rules only apply one way. I'm not ashamed to admit, I sat in my recliner one night, head in my hands, wondering if it was worth it. I'd fought wars abroad, buried friends, lived long enough to want peace. Was I really willing to spend what years I had left fighting a suburban tyrant? But then I thought of Mrs. Henderson, who'd lived here 40 years, crying because Karen fined her for putting wind chimes on her porch. I thought of the single mom down the street, working double shifts and still being threatened with foreclosure over a kid's trampoline. And I thought of my wife, God rest her, who used to tell me, Frank, when you see wrong and stay silent, That's the same as doing it yourself. That night, I swore to myself I wouldn't quit. And just when I needed it most, the first sign of hope arrived. A letter. Not from the HOA this time, but from the county auditor's office. Official seal, black ink. They'd received our petition and documentation, and they were opening a preliminary review. I practically shouted when I read it. I called Jim and Marcy right away. "They're looking into it! We've got traction!" We celebrated with beers on my driveway, 6 feet apart, masks dangling from our ears like awkward accessories. For the first time in weeks, laughter echoed down Maple Drive. But Karen wasn't done. The very next morning, the HOA blasted an email to the entire neighborhood, subject line, "Warning, community disruption." It read like propaganda. She accused a small group of troublemakers of spreading lies, of trying to destabilize Maple Creek during a fragile time. She painted me by name as a disgruntled retiree with a personal vendetta. Neighbors forwarded it to me instantly, some angry, some worried. "She's trying to smear you," Marcy said. I chuckled, shaking my head. Good. It means she's scared. But then came twist number 1. That afternoon, I got a letter not from Karen, but from a lawyer. A cease and desist order, accusing me of defamation and inciting unrest. If I didn't retract my accusations and disband the coalition, they threatened to sue me personally. I sat at my kitchen table, reading the legal jargon, my hands tight around the paper. For the first time, I felt the weight of the fight. Lawsuits weren't like bogus fines, you couldn't just laugh them off. I called my daughter Emily, who lives a few towns over. She's a paralegal, sharp as a tack. "Dad," she said firmly, "don't you dare back down. This is textbook intimidation. They don't want this to go to court, because then everything comes out." Her words steadied me. I called their bluff, forwarding the letter straight to the Attorney General's office, along with every fine and threat we'd received. Karen had played her hand too early. Still, she doubled down. Suddenly, the HOA board announced mandatory inspections of every home. And wouldn't you know it, only coalition members failed. My house was cited for loose siding that didn't exist. Jim was ordered to replace his perfectly good fence. Marcy's driveway was cracked even though it wasn't. We realized Karen wasn't just trying to intimidate us, she was trying to bleed us financially, hoping we'd give up rather than fight. But the community spirit had shifted. Instead of folding, people started helping each other. Neighbors showed up at Marcy's with buckets of sealant to fix her flawless driveway. Jim's fence became a neighborhood project. Even kids pitched in, holding flashlights while dads painted mailboxes. And through it all, the chant grew louder. "Audit now! Audit now! Audit now!" Then came twist number 2. Late one evening, as I was sitting on my porch with a glass of iced tea, a car pulled up. Out stepped a man in a gray suit carrying a briefcase. "You Frank?" he asked. "That's me." He introduced himself as an investigator from the state attorney general's office. He'd been assigned to our complaint. "We've seen enough red flags to launch a formal audit," he told me. "But we'll need cooperation documents, testimony. Are you and your neighbors willing to stand firm?" I almost laughed. "You have no idea how ready we are." When I told the coalition the news, the cheers echoed down the block. It felt like the 4th of July. Fireworks of hope. But here's where Karen made her biggest mistake yet. At the next HOA board meeting, virtual again, she went on a tirade. Red-faced, voice trembling with rage, she shouted at us through the screen. "You people think you can challenge me? You think some washed-up veteran and his little gang can undermine decades of hard work? You're pathetic! And mark my words, you will regret this audit!" I watched her lose control in real time, and I thought, there it is, the meltdown. The moment she revealed her true self to the whole neighborhood. Screenshots of her rant spread like wildfire. Neighbors who'd been on the fence finally saw the dictator behind the smile. Support for our coalition doubled overnight. By the end of that week, more than 2/3 of Maple Creek had signed onto the audit demand. Karen's grip was slipping. And then came twist number 3. The investigator called me back. "Frank," he said, his voice tight, "we've uncovered something serious. Funds weren't just misused, they were diverted into personal accounts, and not just Karen's. The entire board is implicated. I sat there in stunned silence. It wasn't just one greedy HOA president. It was a web of corruption. Tens of thousands of dollars siphoned off, hidden behind fake invoices and sham projects. The thunderstorm had broken. But of course, Karen wasn't going to surrender quietly. Her retaliation was about to reach new, dangerous levels. And that's where I'll leave you, because Chapter 4 is where the gloves come off, lawsuits filed, neighbors rallying, and the audit blowing the lid off Maple Creek's darkest secrets. When the state investigator's words sank in that the whole HOA board, not just Karen, was pocketing money, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. It was one thing to suspect mismanagement. It was another to have confirmation that our so-called leaders had been robbing us blind for years. It should have felt like victory, but instead it felt like staring at a hornet's nest after you've just poked it with a stick. You know the swarm is coming, you just don't know when. Sure enough, the swarm came fast. The very next morning, the HOA email blast hit. Subject line: Protect Maple Creek. Stop the audit scam. Karen's words dripped with venom. She accused me, by name, of conspiring with outside agitators to destroy property values. She painted the audit as an attack on the community, not a safeguard. And she threw in one line that made my blood boil. Those unwilling to comply with HOA leadership should consider relocating. Translation? Get out if you don't like it. I sat on my porch, sipping my coffee, reading that email on my phone, and I'll admit, I almost spit the coffee out laughing. Relocate? After 20 years here? After raising my kids, planting every rose bush with my own hands, painting this house more times than I can count? She had no idea who she was dealing with. But laughter aside, the smear campaign worked on a few. A couple of neighbors stopped waving when I walked past. Some looked away, nervous. Karen had ruled this place by fear for too long, and old habits die hard. Still, our coalition wasn't budging. If anything, Karen's meltdown at the last board meeting had pushed more folks into our corner. And now, with the audit officially greenlit, we had momentum. The investigator set up interviews with several of us. Mine was first. Sitting across from him in my living room, with stacks of receipts and fines laid out on the coffee table, I felt like I was back giving a mission briefing. I walked him through everything: Susan's folder, the bogus fines, the anonymous email with spa charges. He nodded, taking notes. This is textbook embezzlement, but we'll need airtight records to hold up in court. You'll have them, I said. This neighborhood's been documenting Karen's nonsense for years. She thought we were all just grumbling, but we were building a paper trail. And here's where twist number 1 hit. As the audit began, Karen tried her nastiest move yet. I came home one afternoon to find a bright orange notice stapled to my door. OA notice. Property in violation of bylaws. Foreclosure proceedings pending. My heart skipped. For a second, I imagined losing the house my wife and I had built our life in. But then I forced myself to breathe, to read carefully. The notice was full of holes. No lawyer's signature, no county stamp, just HOA letterhead and Karen's scrawl. I called the investigator. He came by, looked it over, and shook his head. This is a scare tactic. Illegal. We'll add it to the file. Still, seeing that word foreclosure plastered on my front door made my stomach knot. And that was the point. Karen wanted me rattled, but instead, it backfired. Neighbors saw the notice. They saw me tear it down, tape it to my garage wall like a trophy, and announce to everyone within earshot, "This is how desperate they are. They're faking liens now. Who's next?" The tide shifted again. People realized Karen's power was smoke and mirrors, and once folks see through smoke, they stop choking. Meanwhile, the audit churned on. The investigator dug into bank records, subpoenaed invoices, interviewed former contractors, and the deeper he went, the uglier it got. Tens of thousands spent on landscaping that never happened. Checks written to companies that didn't exist. OA credit cards used for vacations, jewelry, even a down payment on a car. I'll never forget the investigator leaning back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "Frank, This isn't mismanagement. This is organized theft. And that's when twist number 2 hit. The board panicked. 2 members resigned suddenly, citing personal reasons. But we all knew why. And the very next day, Karen's husband, who never showed his face at meetings, was spotted shredding papers in their garage. Word spread like wildfire. Folks took videos, posted them in our neighborhood Facebook group. Suddenly, the very people Karen had ruled over with threats were documenting her downfall in real time. It was like watching a dam crack. But Karen, stubborn as ever, doubled down. She called an emergency meeting. I logged on, along with half the neighborhood, screens flickering with angry faces. Karen launched into a tirade. This audit is harassment. These so-called neighbors are traitors, destroying our community from within. If you don't stand with me, you stand against Maple Creek. Then she pointed at her webcam, practically jabbing a finger at me. And you, Frank, you're the ringleader. When this is over, you'll wish you'd never moved here. I didn't flinch. Karen, the only one destroying Maple Creek is you. And when this audit is done, the truth will speak louder than any of your threats. The chat box lit up with comments. We support Frank. Audit now. Step down, Karen. And there it was, her empire crumbling in real time. Still, I knew better than to celebrate too early. Cornered animals lash out, and Karen was cornered. The very next day, twist number 3 dropped. A sheriff's deputy showed up at my door. Not with a warrant, thank God, but with a harassment complaint filed by Karen. She accused me of stalking, intimidation, even trespassing. The deputy, a young guy with kind eyes, looked almost embarrassed. Sir, I don't think this will go anywhere, but I have to follow protocol. I handed him the stack of certified letters, the receipts, the audit notice. Son, the only stalking going on here is Karen stalking my mailbox. He chuckled. Between you and me, half the county knows her reputation. Hang tight. The truth will catch up. And it did faster than I thought, because twist number 4 was the bombshell. The investigator called me late one evening. His voice was sharp, urgent. Frank, we've confirmed it. The HOA board has been diverting funds for years. We're recommending criminal charges. I sat in my recliner, the old springs creaking beneath me, and let out a long breath. For the first time in months, the weight lifted from my shoulders. But before victory came the showdown. Karen wasn't done. She had one last card to play, and when she played it, Maple Creek would erupt like never before. That's where Chapter 5 begins the board's desperate counterattack, the audit findings going public, and the neighborhood finally choosing sides once and for all. I've always believed that the devil hides in the details. That was something drilled into me during my 20 years in the Air Force. Out there, missing a detail could mean a mission going sideways, or worse. Back home, in this little suburban battlefield, it meant the difference between getting steamrolled by the HOA or finding the leverage I needed to fight back. After Martha tipped me off about old financial reports, I didn't sleep much that night. I sat at my kitchen table with a pot of coffee and my laptop open, staring at the HOA's so-called budget summary I'd managed to download from their portal. It was a joke. No itemization, no vendor names, just vague categories like maintenance and landscaping. $10,000 here, $15,000 there. Neat round numbers that looked more like guesses than actual expenses. That's when I remembered something. Every HOA in Florida is legally required to keep detailed financial records for at least 7 years. And here's the kicker, homeowners have the right to request access to those records. Most people don't know that, but I did. Thanks to the hours I'd spent reading state statutes while the board thought I was just some grumpy retiree yelling at clouds. No, I was building my case. The next morning, I drafted a formal letter. This is a written request to inspect and copy all HOA financial records for the past 5 fiscal years in compliance with Florida Statute 720.303. I almost chuckled writing it out, imagining Karen and her cronies choking on their morning lattes when they saw it. I hand-delivered it to the HOA office, really just a converted storage room by the pool deck while Karen was inside. She looked up from her desk, her smile tighter than ever. Mr. Sullivan, what brings you here? I slid the envelope across the desk. Just exercising my homeowner rights, I said. Calm as you please. Her smile twitched. She didn't even open it before tucking it under a folder like it was contaminated. You know, these things take time, she said, her voice syrupy but sharp. The board is very busy. Florida law says you have 10 business days, I replied. Then I leaned in a little. Tick-tock. I walked out before she could respond, heart pounding with that mix of nerves and adrenaline you get when you know you've just thrown the first real punch. 10 days later, a box showed up at my doorstep. Sloppy, half-sealed with packing tape, like someone wanted to make a point about how inconvenient this was. Inside were stacks of invoices, receipts, and payment stubs. I carried it into the garage, set up a folding table, and started sorting like it was my new mission briefing. That's when the rot began to show. A 7,500 landscaping consultation paid to a company with no website, no business license listed in the county. Multiple checks written to the same vendor with slightly different names. One month it was Sunshine Maint, the next Sunshine Maintenance Services. My gut told me they were shell companies. Worse, I noticed the signatures. Every check was signed by Karen herself, sometimes co-signed by her buddy Gerald. No rotation, no oversight. The deeper I dug, the uglier it got. One entry claimed 12-0 for pool repairs, except I remembered clear as day that the pool had been closed all summer because the pump was out of service. There was no repair. The money just vanished. Around midnight, I sat back in my chair, staring at the mountain of paper. My pulse was racing, my hands actually shaking. This wasn't just mismanagement. This was theft. They weren't doubling fees because expenses had gone up. They were lining their own pockets. The HOA board wasn't just corrupt. They were brazen criminals hiding behind bylaws. For a moment, I just sat there in silence, the weight of it pressing down on me. Then I grabbed my phone and snapped photos of the most damning documents. I sent a few to Martha with a single message. You were right, she replied almost instantly. I knew it. What's our next move? That was the million-dollar question. Part of me wanted to march back into the next board meeting and slap the papers on the table. Watch Karen's face turn red, hear the gasps from the neighbors. But another part of me knew better. If I tipped my hand too early, they'd find a way to cover their tracks, spin the story, maybe even destroy more records. I needed to be smarter. I needed allies. That's when I thought about Frank, the retired accountant who lived 2 streets over. He'd mentioned before how the HOA never shared proper numbers. If anyone could make sense of these records and back me up with credibility, it was him. So I boxed up the papers and walked them over to his place the next morning. Frank answered in his bathrobe, coffee in hand. Jack, you look like a man with trouble. You could say that, I said, holding up the box. How do you feel about a little number crunching? He invited me in, and together we started piecing it together like detectives at a crime scene. Within an hour, his face had that same tight frown I'd been wearing all night. Jack, he said quietly, this isn't just sloppy accounting. This is fraud. Hearing it out loud made it real and terrifying. Because if we were right, we weren't just up against a petty HOA board anymore. We were about to take on people who had something very real to lose. People who might fight tooth and nail to keep their little empire standing. I felt that old soldier's calm settle over me. The storm was here, and I'd been through storms before. Only this time, it wasn't a foreign enemy. It was Karen and her board of cronies, right in my own backyard. And if they thought doubling my fees was going to scare me into silence, they were about to learn what real persistence looked like. If you found proof your HOA board was stealing money, would you confront them directly or quietly build your case? Frank and I spent days combing through those records. Every page we flipped seemed to reveal another crack in the foundation of Karen's so-called leadership. Duplicate invoices, payments to businesses that didn't exist, cash withdrawals that had no business being there. By the time Frank finished his calculations, the total amount unaccounted for was over 60. That number hit me like a punch to the gut. 60 grand. That wasn't just loose change slipping through the cracks, that was theft on a scale that could sink our entire neighborhood. I remember sitting in Frank's kitchen, the box of papers between us, both of us staring at the figure he'd circled on the pad. Jack, he said quietly, this isn't just HOA mismanagement. This is a crime. I nodded, though my stomach twisted. I know, but the question is, do we confront them now, or do we go bigger? Frank leaned back in his chair. If you hit them head on, they'll spin it. Call it a mistake. Say you're harassing them. But if you bring the neighbors in, show them the truth they can't hide. Public opinion will bury them before the law even gets involved. That stuck with me. I'd seen the board use fear and silence to keep people in line. But I also knew my neighbors, retirees, veterans, young families trying to keep their heads above water. If they saw the evidence with their own eyes, the fear would crack. And once that happened, Karen's power would crumble like a sandcastle in the tide. So, we hatched a plan. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening in the clubhouse. Normally, only a handful of residents showed up, just enough for Karen to wave around her quorum and ram through her agenda. But this time, I wasn't going to let it be business as usual. Martha helped me spread the word. She called neighbors, dropped flyers in mailboxes, even whispered the magic words, "We found proof they're stealing from us." By the day of the meeting, you could feel the buzz in the air. People who hadn't cared about HOA politics in years suddenly had fire in their eyes. That night, when I walked into the clubhouse, I almost laughed. The place was packed wall to wall. Folding chairs had been dragged in, neighbors stood in the back. Even old Mr. Collins, who never left his porch, was there with his cane. Karen sat at the front table with her usual smirk, but I saw the flicker of unease when she realized she wasn't facing the usual sleepy crowd. She cleared her throat, shuffling her papers. "All right, let's bring this meeting to order. First item, hold on." I stood up, holding a manila folder. My voice carried, steady and clear. "Before you get started, the homeowners deserve to see where their money has been going." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Karen's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Sullivan, this is not on the agenda." "Neither was a $60,000 hole in the budget," I shot back. Gasps. Neighbors turned, whispering, eyes wide. Frank stepped up beside me and laid out the documents on a table in the center of the room. "These are the financial records your board was required by law to provide. I've reviewed them. What you'll see here is evidence of fraud checks to fake companies, missing funds, and unauthorized spending." The room exploded. People surged forward, craning their necks to see. Someone shouted, "Is this true?" Another voice yelled, "I knew something was off with those fees." Karen slammed her gavel. "Order! Order!" But the more she shouted, the less anyone listened. Her voice, once commanding, now sounded shrill against the roar of angry homeowners. I stepped closer to the front table, fixing her with a stare. "You raised our fees, threatened our homes, and bullied us into silence. But now, for the first time since I'd moved in, Karen didn't have a comeback. Her face flushed red, her lips pressed thin, and her hands trembled as she gripped the gavel. The board members beside her shifted uncomfortably, like rats realizing the ship was sinking. Then, from the back of the room, Martha's voice rang out. "We demand a vote of no confidence!" The crowd roared in agreement, clapping, stomping, shouting. Karen tried to restore order, but it was like trying to stop a storm with an umbrella. Her control had shattered, and in that moment, standing in the swell of voices, I realized something. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was the neighborhood's. Together, we'd turned fear into fury, and now the board had nowhere to hide. But exposing them in front of the neighbors was just the beginning. If the numbers were as bad as they looked, the next step would be law enforcement. And I had a feeling Karen wasn't going down without a fight. If you were in that meeting, would you have shouted in anger or stayed quiet and watched the drama unfold? The night after the meeting, I barely slept. The adrenaline of what had just happened kept replaying in my head the sea of angry neighbors, Karen's face crumbling under the weight of the evidence, the chance for her removal. For the first time in months, I felt like we had hope. But the next morning, reality came knocking. Literally, a sharp rap on my door jolted me from my coffee. When I opened it, a man in a suit handed me a thick envelope. "You've been served." I stood frozen in the doorway as he walked back to his car. Inside the envelope was a cease and desist letter from a law firm I'd never heard of. The words leapt off the page. Defamation. Harassment. illegal access of HOA records. Karen wasn't licking her wounds, she was going on the offensive. Martha came over as soon as she heard. She picked up the letter with her glasses perched low on her nose. Defamation? Jack, you showed people the documents they gave you. Doesn't matter, I sighed, rubbing my temples. Karen's not trying to win in court. She's trying to scare me into silence. And it didn't stop there. Over the next week, neighbors started telling me about late-night phone calls, warning them to stay out of it if they valued their homes. Someone slashed Frank's tire. Flyers appeared on mailboxes claiming I was a troublemaker who was trying to tear the community apart. It was dirty, it was ugly, and it was classic Karen. But instead of backing down, it only hardened my resolve. If she wanted to drag this fight into the legal arena, then so be it. I wasn't going to fight alone. Frank reached out to an old buddy of his, a retired attorney named Linda, who specialized in HOA disputes. She was sharp, calm, and the kind of person who could slice through Karen's theatrics with surgical precision. After looking at the documents, Linda leaned back in her chair and gave a thin smile. This isn't just grounds for removal. This is embezzlement. If she wants to play lawyer games, we'll answer with something much heavier, criminal charges. Hearing that word criminal was like a switch flipping. It wasn't just neighborhood politics anymore. It was theft, fraud, and the kind of mess that could land Karen in handcuffs. Still, I had doubts. One night, sitting on the porch, I turned to Martha. What if this drags on for years? What if we make things worse for everyone? She put her hand on mine. Jack, bullies like Karen count on people giving up. If you stop now, she wins and she'll keep bleeding this community dry. But if you finish this, even if it's hard, you'll give everyone here their home back. Her words lit a fire in me I didn't know I still had. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the following week, and Karen clearly thought she'd cowed me into silence. But when she banged her gavel to open the session, I rose to my feet, calm and steady. Before you start, I said, holding up a folder, I want to make something clear. The evidence of fraud has been submitted to the district attorney's office. From here on out, this isn't just an HOA issue. It's a criminal investigation. Gasps. Whispers. I snapping back to Karen. Her face went white. For once, her mouth opened but no sound came out. And that silence, in front of all those neighbors, was worth more than 1,000 speeches. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Cornered animals lash out hardest. And Karen, she wasn't the type to go quietly. The storm was only beginning. If someone tried to silence you with threats and lawsuits, would you keep pushing forward or back off to protect yourself? After I dropped that bombshell at the HOA meeting, the neighborhood was buzzing. Some people were relieved, whispering about finally seeing justice. Others were scared, wondering if this would drag down property values. But one thing was certain, Karen was cornered. And like I feared, a cornered Karen was the most dangerous of all. 2 nights later, I caught the faint hum of a drone outside my bedroom window. At first, I thought I imagined it, but when I yanked open the blinds, I saw the blinking lights hovering, pointing its little camera directly into my house. The second I stepped outside, it zipped away into the night. The next morning, Frank found his backyard gate wide open, his shed rifled through. Nothing stolen, just disturbed like someone wanted him to feel watched. And Martha, bless her heart, swore she saw Karen sitting in her SUV at the end of the street one night, lights off, just staring at my house. It was harassment, plain and simple. But instead of rattling me, it gave Linda, our lawyer, more ammunition. She's escalating, Linda said, tapping her pen against her notepad. If we document all this photos, statements, recordings, we'll bury her. Judges hate this kind of intimidation. Still, Karen wasn't without allies. At the next board meeting, 2 of her longtime cronies, Tom and Denise, tried to stall the motion to suspend her powers. This is all just gossip and paranoia, Tom balked. Jack has a personal vendetta, and he's dragging us all down with him. I looked around the room, neighbors shifting uncomfortably in their seats, people afraid to speak. That's when I realized fear was still Karen's greatest weapon. So I stood, calm and steady. If this were gossip, I said, holding up a stack of papers, Then why does the county clerk's office have signed records showing HOA funds transferred into Karen's personal account? Why does the roofing company she hired say they never got paid, even though checks were written? And why did I just get off the phone with the district attorney's office, who confirmed this is now under formal review? Silence. The board members looked like someone had pulled the rug out from under them. Even Tom and Denise had no comeback. Karen's face turned a shade of red I'd never seen before. She slammed her gavel down so hard it cracked. "This meeting is over!" she screeched, storming out. But the neighbors didn't follow her. They stayed, murmuring, some even clapping quietly. For the first time, the tide had fully shifted. And as I packed up my papers, Frank leaned in and whispered, "She knows it's over, but she's not going down without a final swing." He was right. Karen was unraveling. And when people like her unravel, they drag everyone with them. This battle was about to reach its climax. When someone powerful starts losing control, do you think they become more dangerous or finally vulnerable? The very next week, the neighborhood was buzzing again, but this time, it wasn't Karen stirring the pot. It was the arrival of two men in suits from the county DA's office. They didn't bother with pleasantries. They walked right into the HOA office with folders in hand and grim expressions on their faces. By evening, word had spread. Subpoenas were issued. The HOA's bank records were being seized. Karen was officially under investigation. I should have felt triumphant, but instead, I felt the heavy weight of anticipation. Because if there was one thing I'd learned, it was that Karen wasn't going to walk quietly into defeat. That night, she proved me right. I got a letter shoved into my mailbox, no stamp, no return address. Inside was a single piece of paper with 6 words scrawled in red marker. "You'll regret ever crossing me." Linda, our lawyer, laughed when she saw it. Classic intimidation tactic. "Keep it. It's evidence." But Frank looked uneasy. "Jack, don't underestimate her. Cornered people do stupid things." The next HOA meeting was the most packed I'd ever seen. Neighbors filled the folding chairs lining the walls, some standing in the back. Everyone wanted to see the drama unfold. Karen marched in late, flanked by Tom and Denise. Her eyes burned holes into me, but her voice was sugar-coated venom. "This neighborhood has been poisoned by lies," she said, pacing the front of the room. "Lies spread by Jack here, who has nothing better to do than dig into matters that don't concern him. And now, because of his meddling, we're facing legal trouble that could cost us all." A few gasps, a few head shakes. I stood slowly, my voice calm. "Karen, this isn't about me. This is about the tens of thousands of dollars that went missing under your watch. It's about the contracts that were never fulfilled, and it's about the intimidation you've used to silence anyone who dared question you." Then I held up my trump card, a signed letter from the DA confirming that their office had found probable cause of embezzlement. The room erupted. Some neighbors shouted, others clapped. Karen's mask cracked for the first time. She slammed her hands on the table. "You think you've won, Jack? You think you're some kind of hero?" And then, her voice dropped low, almost a growl. "You have no idea what I'm capable of." Before anyone could respond, the DA's investigator stepped forward from the back of the room. I hadn't even noticed they were there until that moment. "Actually," one of them said firmly, "we do. Karen Miller, you're under investigation for embezzlement, fraud, and harassment. We advise you to step down as HOA president immediately, pending the outcome." The air was electric. Karen froze, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for water. Tom and Denise shrank back, refusing to meet her eye. The neighbors once cowed by her presence sat taller, their fear evaporating. For the first time, Karen looked small, still dangerous, still defiant, but small. And I realized the war wasn't over, but the battlefield had shifted. From here on out, it was in the hands of the law. But I knew Karen wasn't finished with me, not yet. Do you believe justice is best served in the courtroom? Or does real justice come when a community stands together? The courtroom was colder than I expected, not in temperature, but in mood. Neighbors whispered in the gallery, their voices low, the weight of months of tension hanging over us all. Karen sat at the defense table, a sharp navy suit replacing her usual flowery blouses. But no suit in the world could cover the scowl carved into her face. Tom and Denise, nowhere to be found. They'd cut ties the moment the DA filed charges. I sat behind Linda, our lawyer, trying to steady my hands. This wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about closure for every homeowner she'd bullied, for every dollar she'd stolen, and for the peace we'd lost under her reign. The DA laid out the evidence with brutal clarity. Bank records showing Karen transferring HOA funds into her personal account. Fake invoices from her brother-in-law's landscaping company. Testimony from the treasurer who admitted Karen pressured her into silence. When the treasurer broke down crying on the stand, the room went still. Karen, for her part, didn't flinch. She smirked, tapped her pen, whispered to her lawyer. But then it was my turn. I walked to the witness stand, swore in, and looked directly at her. For months, she'd tried to make me feel small. But now, she was the one cornered. I didn't set out to be anyone's enemy, I began. I moved into Maplewood Ridge because I believed in community. But what I found was fear. Fear caused by one person's greed and intimidation. Karen wasn't protecting this neighborhood. She was exploiting it. Karen shot up from her chair, slamming her palms on the table. Lies! All lies! The judge banged his gavel. Mrs. Miller, sit down, or you'll be held in contempt. For the first time, her confidence cracked. She sat, fuming, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. The DA ended with this. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this isn't about HOA rules. This is about trust. And when trust is broken this deeply, justice must be served. It didn't take long. The jury filed back in less than 2 hours later. On the charge of embezzlement, guilty. On the charge of fraud, guilty. On the charge of harassment, guilty. The words hit like thunderclaps. Karen's face drained of color. She stumbled as the bailiff moved to cuff her. Still, she hissed at me one last time as they let her out. You haven't seen the last of me. But her voice was shaky now, hollow. The neighborhood exhaled as one. It was over. Neighbors hugged each other. Some even cried. Frank patted my shoulder. Jack, you did it! You stood up when no one else could! I didn't feel like a hero. I just felt relieved. The storm that had hung over Maplewood Ridge was finally breaking, and as Karen disappeared through the courtroom doors, shackled and scowling, I realized something. Bullies only win as long as good people stay silent. Have you ever seen someone finally face the consequences of their actions after years of getting away with it? How did it feel to witness justice? 6 months later, Maplewood Ridge looked different. Not in its houses or lawns, but in its spirit. The fear that once shadowed our neighborhood had lifted. Kids rode their bikes without worried glances from their parents. Neighbors lingered at mailboxes, chatting and laughing. For the first time in years, Maplewood Ridge felt like a community again. Karen's name was barely spoken anymore, except in hushed jokes about the ghost of HOA past. She was serving her sentence, and though appeals were whispered, no one really believed she'd slither her way back. At the HOA's first official meeting after her sentencing, the atmosphere was electric. Linda was voted president unanimously. Frank volunteered to head the neighborhood watch. Even Denise, who had once backed Karen, showed up with cookies, trying to make amends. When it was my turn to speak, I stood and looked around the room. I moved here hoping for peace and belonging. For a while, I thought I'd made a mistake. But seeing all of you tonight working together, looking out for each other, I know I was wrong. Maplewood Ridge isn't perfect. No community is. But it's ours. And together, we can make it better. The applause was warm. Not the kind you hear at formal meetings, but the genuine kind that comes from shared struggle. Afterward, as I walked home under the glow of the street lamps, I thought about everything that had happened. The lies, the intimidation, the long nights wondering if I was in over my head. But more than that, I thought about the victories. Standing up in court, seeing neighbors find their voice again, watching the bully fall. Linda caught up with me on the sidewalk, smiling. You know, Jack, none of this would have happened if you hadn't kept pushing. You reminded us what courage looks like. I chuckled. Courage. I was scared half the time. Exactly, she said. That's what makes it real. We stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of a neighborhood finally at peace. And I realized something I wanted to carry with me forever. Evil doesn't just thrive on power. It thrives on silence. But when ordinary people refuse to stay quiet when they stand up, even scared justice has a way of finding its voice. For Maplewood Ridge, that voice was ours. And for me, it was the reminder that no matter how dark things get, community true, honest community, always has a way of coming back to life. Have you ever seen a community or family come back stronger after facing a bully or crisis? What gave you hope that things could heal?